everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we're going to dye a superwash merino alpaca blend, and my plan is to dye this in a bit of a random, non-repeating colorway. And by non-repeating, I suppose what I mean is really non-pooling, because there's two main ways that you can dye up your yarn in a variegated way. But before I talk a little bit more about that and the yarn we're dyeing today, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Angela. Angela, thank you so much for being my lab partner today. Normally when we dye yarn, it is in this hank. It's a circular hank. Usually these are around a yard and a half circumference or so. It can vary a little bit depending on supplier. Now, if you dye it, say half one color, half another color, you're gonna get a colorway that is repeating. Each time you finish a revolution, you're gonna have the same size color sections. And that can lead to pooling, or where the yarn sort of aligns itself and you end up with chunks of color. If you apply your colors a little bit more randomly throughout the skein, so that way each, I guess, round that is in here is not exactly the same, you're more likely to end up with yarn that is going to have a much more random pattern to it when you knit with it. Which isn't to say that there might not be some pooling. There definitely could be, depending on what you're knitting and how many colors you have, but you're more likely to get something that is a lot more random and distributed. Now, the repeating example that I mentioned here, I suggested 2 colors. Obviously, you can have things that pool that have 6 different sections throughout the skein. Now, I have not dyed something planned pooling. This is a very highly requested video, and I know that there are some colorways that I dye that will pool, but maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the video, because today the goal is to do something random. And for our yarn base, I mentioned that we're going to use a superwash merino alpaca blend. This yarn is Nomad's Steam. This yarn is 80% fine superwash merino wool, 20% baby alpaca. Nomad actually gave me this in a gift a long time ago when I was reviewing their yarn bases, but this video is not sponsored. I added some removable nylon zip ties onto the yarn and then brought it over to the sink to add some cool water so I could pre-soak it. I'm pre-soaking the yarn because that means that we're not going for an even colorway, but you do need the yarn to get wet at some point, and sometimes blends with silk or alpaca might not be as absorbent as yarn that is just wool. So I went ahead and let this yarn pre-soak for a bit over an hour at room temperature. But now let's jump in and look at our colors. I pulled some pinks, browns, and then a blue and a purple for today. These are Dharma acid dyes in Amethyst, Cabernet, Electric Violet, Chocolate Brown, and Caribbean Blue. And I'm thinking that Amethyst is gonna be sort of the main vibe, but we're also gonna see what these colors do as we layer them together and have some fun. This is my 4-inch deep full-size catering steam pan. And I'm bringing over the 300 grams of yarn that I pre-soaked. And these hanks feel pretty long, maybe even a little bit longer than the one I was using as an example in the introduction. I am not squeezing out a lot of the pre-soak water. Sometimes you can use that pre-soak water for the dyeing. Other times when you pre-soak the yarn, you might see some color come out in the water, in which case then I like to swap it over. There's maybe a hair, I don't think it's showing up on video, of a little bit of color. And it's not that it's color, but it could be oils or something, and yeah, I just figure we may as well change it. So let me get 8 cups of water over here. Okay, I'm gonna bring this over. Now, when I arrange my yarn in the pan, there are two things that are going to help us get something non-repeating. One is the fact that the yarn is not straight. It is scrunched up. So even if I dye a line across here, it's not going to give a Joann's or Michael's colorway repeating everything is the same size, because even within one skein, the strands are sort of cockeye to one another. The other thing I try to do is have it such, not in like a circle like this, but sort of like this around in the pan, so that way we're really just exposing one side at a time. Now, I have not dyed this yarn base a lot, and it's possible, as I add 3 tablespoons of white vinegar, it's possible that the dyes are going to spread more than I'm anticipating, but we're probably going to add a little bit of each color, see what they're going to do, and then decide where we want to go with this combination. And I'm very excited about that. So I'm going to start heating this up. I'm on 2 gas burners on my stove, and I'm on medium heat. And I just realized that I'm going to want a yarn mop today, or a bonus skein of yarn that I use to soak up dye powder from my hands. So this is a skein of Knit Picks Hawthorne fingering weight yarn that I'm just popping in here really quick, just to make it a little bit damp. This is the yarn that I was using in my introduction and example there. So I'm just making it damp so it has acid in here as well, squeezing out most of the liquid. Maybe that's reduced the volume in here a little bit, but not very much. And I'm going to have this off camera in a little pan so we get a bonus colorway out of all of the dyes that we're using today. So I'll see you when we're warm. We are getting nice and warm. We can see some steam. I'm going to reduce the heat to low. I try never to go beyond a medium heat for very long, because if I have the heat a little high, then these edges of the pan can get really warm. And if I keep the flames a little bit smaller, then I can comfortably touch the sides, but always take care. So now I'm going to go put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves so we can start applying dry dye powders onto our yarn. And so I will sound a little more muffled. The only other thing of note is that you want your gloved fingertips to be really dry when you go ahead and pick up the dye from the container, because if your hands are not dry, then you can introduce moisture into the jar. More of it will come up on your fingertips. Okay, I used just a little bit of this color right there. We could end up with some speckles, but you could see I am doing some random placement, but I want to get a feel of how intense each color is. And also, not just the intensity, but I also just want to feel for the hues before we go too far. Okay, this is the Cabernet, which I know is a lot more pigmented. It's less bright than the Berry Crush. Right now, things are a lot less saturated than what I'm hoping for in the end, but we're going to be layering color. Okay, Caribbean Blue is a bright color that packs a bit of a punch. And for all I'm randomly placing it, ideally, I want to use a similar amount of color on each skein to the best of my ability. But you can see how we're going to have differences in our dye lots from skein to skein. And you can also see just how intense this color is. But the more we add the dyes and layer them, we're going to see a lot of blending of things as time goes on. And so I think it should be fun. Now for now, I'm attempting to add colors mostly to areas where they haven't been yet. Or by colors haven't been yet, where I haven't added any color yet. Okay. I do think I want the Amethyst to be the star, which means that as we come in, there we go, which means that as I come in and add color for different layers, I likely will do that one last and add it where I feel like we need just more color overall. Amethyst is not a color that, oh, you see some of that just fell. That's fine. It's not a color I use a lot. I think that the Cabernet is going to become a little bit more of an accent color. Okay. Now these colors will spread and blend, and so things may end up feeling more subtle overall. It's possible I picked the wrong base for this overall demonstration, but we're trying and seeing where things go. I am okay with some whites being left behind. I can also move some of these colors around. Now, if you have a main color and then a lot of secondary kind of colors, contrasting colors in there, then we probably would get some pooling with the amethyst just because of the way that the colors will go together. To break this up a little bit, I'm coming in with some little bits of our Caribbean blue, and I don't know if I'm going to leave it as speckles. Maybe I will. It will spread because that's a color that spreads a lot. We'll see what that does. It's a fun thing with doing colorways like this. Now, if I want to keep these blue and purple and brown sections a little bit brighter, as I flip the yarn, I should add purple where we see purple, blue where we see blue, and things like that. I think I'm going to try to not touch those little Caribbean blue spots that I added, just for fun. And so let's go ahead and wait 10 minutes and then see what has happened to our yarn. And if this yarn ends up not being the best example of what a non-repeating colorway can look like as you dye it, that is totally okay. It's not a problem because I like where this is going. I think that this is really beautiful, and that's what's the most important. And so we're just having fun. But Angela, I hope you like where we're headed, and I'll see you when the timer goes off. Okay, let's see. Ooh, things are striking pretty well. What about in these areas? Oh, goody. Oh, goody. Okay, there's a little bit of color there. The more color that's in the water before we flip will result in more blending, and so that's why we wait. Okay, but see now as I lift this, it sort of flipped, but you can see how that blue isn't going all the way across. That gives like a bit of randomness to where those colors are placed. Okay. And actually some of the blues that we're seeing on the other side could be from some of those speckles. They may not be. But the goal is with the flip, and we'll probably do more than just this one, is to expose areas with less color. But I think as we go through, probably not with the brown, but I'm going to try to keep, I think, some blue on those blue sections and a bit of the purple on the more purple sections, just to keep those colors and those spots a little more vibrant. But otherwise, I'm going to put my mats back on and we can carry on. Starting with those brighter colors, I added them and worked them through. On this side, I didn't end up adding any speckles like I did at the first one, because I think there was a section of, it must have been Cabernet, that there was way more dye there in that spot than I thought that I had added, so I worked to spread that out a little bit. I waited 10 minutes, flipped the yarn again, and then this time mostly just added a little bit of Caribbean blue speckles and also a little bit of brown. And I decided that I didn't want to add too much more pink. I really like where things are, and I don't want to push it too far. So I let everything heat set for 30 minutes, knowing that some of those speckles will probably spread out a little bit. But again, I wanted the color to be more concentrated in one section versus going all the way through. I didn't want things to feel more tonal. I still wanted that variegated feeling. And as for our yarn mop, I did pop that in a steamer basket and also steamed it for 30 minutes. In the introduction, I mentioned that I haven't really done a lot of planned pooling colorways, which I have done some. I've dyed some self-striping yarn, which is sort of the pinnacle of planned pooling, because you want it to pool into those stripes. And even specifically, I've done some watermelon self-striping yarn where I wanted, again, the colors to pool in a way that was reminiscent of the fruit. But I think when people talk about planned pooling, I think about getting something almost argyle like this, where you take your yarn and then you decide how many stitches you might want to use for a scarf based on the color repeats. And there's mathematical formulas out there to help you figure this out, so that way you can get colors to pool. The reason why I've not dyed something for this is that you want to get something like that. You need each color section to be exactly the same size. And when I dye yarn, I don't have that level of precision. Even if I do something that is more pooling, variegated kind of colorway, or potentially pooling, right? There's still some variation. One color section could be 6 inches, the next could be 6.5, the next could be 5.75. And those little shifts in the color can make a difference in how things pool. So I think that if I wanted to create a planned pooling kind of colorway, I wouldn't want to deal with a skein that is this small and therefore this thick, that has this many strands across. What I would want to do would be to take a really long hank, like one I might use for self-striping, and even if I'm dyeing the same repeats 2 or 3 times throughout the skein, I can have, I guess, a more defined length of each color section and get some consistency around there. So that's where my brain is going at this point, but honestly, I don't know. If you've dyed a planned pooling colorway, please leave me some tips down in the comments below. I'm not saying I'll never do this, but I think it's worth explaining from time to time why I have not done this. And honestly, maybe I should try to knit a swatch that gives a planned pooling effect before I go ahead and try to dye up some yarn, so that way I can have some understanding. But anyway, let's get back to today's project that is not planned pooling at all, that the goal is to have something more random. And I know I'm not showing a swatch, but we will take a look at the finished skeins and talk about how they are less likely to pool because of the random distribution of color. I have not moved the yarn since the last time I added dye. And so before removing it, I just want to flip it, and especially give this little end over here a nice little dunk. Sometimes if there's powder sitting on the surface of the yarn, that can cause bleeding later on. And in fact, because of some of those speckles I had over there, I had a feeling that they had not dissolved completely, and this should just help us out later on. But this is pretty, and we have a lot of subtle colors and some not so subtle. I think because of the alpaca, things may feel subtle in the end. I think everything is really pretty, so that makes me happy. Okay, and over here in the steamer basket, we have our yarn mop. Lots of color on here as well. A lot of these colors are known bleeders, but I'm going to set this aside to cool, and this one will wash off camera, but I'll show the yarn at the end. Let's wash this Merino alpaca yarn that is superwash. I do still want to be careful with it, but I don't need to be as careful as if it were non-superwash. Now we want to make sure everything is really well submerged. I knew I flipped it over in the pan, but look at how like non-harsh these color transitions are. I love doing that. And also I think that just indicates we're going non-repeating. Again, depending on the stitch pattern, the colors could pool, but depending on, oh no, ooh. I came across, ooh, some powder. Oh man, that was not set. Okay. You know, how many videos, hundreds and hundreds of videos of me washing yarn, this does not happen very much. Just a little bit of blue on my hand. So what I'm gonna do, submerge things really, really well. And I'm gonna let this sit for a little bit before we come back. And as for my hand, I'm gonna go at a different sink, use some of this Cresto color remover to see if I can get this blue off. I have used this in the past and it does work well, but I don't want any of it to get on the yarn. That stuff does work. I don't know what's in it though. It feels oily and a little gritty, and at first when you rub it on your hands it feels like it's not making a difference, but I think it exfoliates, and then with water then the color comes off. I had a glove failure the other day and my pinky turned a beautiful color and it came off. So I wonder if this would have worked with my indigo fail. All right, let's see. Because I had some blue speckles at that top end, and it's funny, when I saw some dye come off in the pan on the edge, I probably should have heat set more, but nothing's coming off on my hands this time, and there wasn't much color in the water. I think it was really just that one little spot. But now we can finish rinsing out the soap. And let's see. We're looking really good. So I'm going to go ahead and put the yarn through my spin dryer. We'll hang it up to dry and then come back and take a closer look. And I know I said I'm going to wash this off camera, and I will, but here is our yarn mop. Guess I'm using, I don't know what color dish soap I used before, but I'll use Blue Dawn this time. Just because I use what is on hand. But anyway, I'm going to wash them up, also hang it up, and well, let's go look at the finished yarn. Here is our finished colorway. And handling the dry yarn, I forgot how much I love this steam base from Nomad. It is amazing, and I highly recommend that. Now let's take a closer look at some of these areas and talk about how it's non-repeating. So for example, in this section right here, we have, it looks like that color goes all the way through, but in fact it doesn't really. Here we have some more browns on part. You can see that each color section, while it's still variegated, each repeat is going to vary a little bit more. And yes, it might pool some, but it probably would then transition pretty quickly. On this other skein, we have a section where it feels slightly more classic repeating, but then we do have some more random areas in here as well. And so what I'm sharing here is my experience knitting with these types of colorways. Certainly you can get pooling from a lot of things, but when you have something planned pooling or a colorway where each section is the same size, then they're more likely to pool and sort of accumulate in the same kind of pattern if your gauge is consistent. And something like this is just going to be a little more random, but everyone has their preference of what they like to work with. Our yarn mop is less saturated overall. You can see each of our different colors on here really easily. Now, if they were the same yarn base, I think that they would pair really well together to do some kind of fade, even though we have more intensity of some of our colors on here, plus more white. Which isn't to say you can't use the fingering weight superwash wool nylon yarn with a worsted weight superwash wool alpaca yarn. You absolutely can mix different yarn bases and fiber types if you so choose. But I would probably, if I was intending to work with something like this together, then try to use the same yarn base as the yarn mop. But that's just me. I've played around with different weights and fiber contents in one project before, and it can work really, really well. Just throwing that out there. Angela, I really hope you love this yarn as much as I do. I'm so thrilled with how it turned out. And Angela, thank you again for being my lab partner for this episode of Dyepot Weekly. If you at home would like to learn more about becoming a lab partner like Angela, go and check out the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. And if the main lab partner listing is sold out, there's another way you can become a lab partner. I have last minute lab partner options where you can pick from a list of videos that I've already started filming and working on, and I'll film a quote last minute shout out to you to include in the beginning and end of that video. And then you help bump a project up the queue because some of that footage has just been waiting for me to edit it for a while. Angela, thank you again. And of course, my Etsy shop is filled with hand-dyed yarn that is featured in my videos that is ready to ship. So if you don't like surprises, you can go and check that out and bring some of that yarn home. I have quite the collection of bare yarn, and I'm trying to work through it. It's really hard for me not to just save fun yarn bases like the Steam to use for, I don't know, a particular experiment or something when I want to play around with maybe alpaca blends. And so sometimes I'm like, oh, I should save this in case I need it later. And then I end up with a lot of random skeins of yarn in my collection. Not saying that that's the case with this particular one, but I'm trying to be better and working through that stash. So if there are any yarn bases that you've seen me unbox but don't remember seeing me play with in a video, let me know if there's something you'd like to see me play with, and I'll try to film that video and make that possible. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.